welcome to this live stream of this incredible tournament that's going on. If you've been watching, you'll see that Hans has had an incredible run so far with two great wins against Giri and Vitukov. And now he's playing white against Étienne Bacrot, sorry. And we'll see. I'll start from the beginning of the game. The game's already started, but we have a simple e4, c5 Sicilian, knight f3, all standard stuff. And this here, we've got the Sicilian Taimanov, which incidentally is my favorite opening by far with the black pieces. So nice one, Etienne. There's actually, interestingly, there's a few different move orders that you can play. So I often play knight c6 instead of e6 first. Because there's lots of different anti-Sicilians that you can play, and it depends on which move you play first. So, for example, if you play knight c6, then d4 takes, and you can play this nice queen c7 move, which doesn't really commit you to the pawn moves. So then if they play something a little odd or a little problematic, let's say they take here, then you haven't already committed to weakening these dark squares. So it gives you a little bit of extra flexibility. Also, if they play knight here, which is a common move, so if we go back to the main line where this happens, sometimes you can, if you have this, sometimes you can get this line and then the knight comes into d6 and it's problematic when you play a6. So if you don't like this line, which I don't like it too much for black, it's still fine, but it's not my favorite. Then if you play this way instead, where you play the queen c7 move first, this way instead when you play the queen c7 move first, then when they play this move, they don't have the d6 square anymore because it's already covered. So there's a few little nuances like that, but Bacrot has gone with the simple e6 on move one. I actually quite like the anti-Sicilian here, g3, which the other variation doesn't allow for. So again, if you play knight c6, g3, well, the point behind g3 is to pin down on d5 and create an isolated queen's pawn, which is just not possible now if we know that they're going to do that, because now I'll play g6 and focus on their d4 square instead. And then I'm not, maybe I could play d6 and e5 and f5 or whatever, but I don't need to focus my efforts on playing d5. I can just ignore that they've played g3. Well, in fact, focus on the fact that they played g3 and ignore the fact that I was going to play a Taimanov. So this is why, in general, I prefer knight c6, but some players, they don't mind this, so they play e6, and that is, in fact, really the main line for the Taimanov. But a very good book that I recommend, the Taimanov Bible, that recommends the knight c6, queen c7 first for the same idea of this flexibility. But anyway, back to the game. So this is all plain theory, white trying to take some control of the center. Black developing his pieces. Again, as I said before, so here white played knight c3 and then queen c7. There's also a really interesting line here that can be played, again, often avoided in the other lines. That's quite theoretical, but it ends up being pretty good for black. So knight b5, queen b8, bishop e3. And the idea is that when you play a6, attacking the knight, I don't mind, I'm going to give it up anyway. So I just come over here and you'll see that the bar just went down on the left here, right? It says that black's better, but it's not immediately obvious why. So black takes the knight, white takes back. And the point, actually, the automatic thing that you'd assume is that you're going to play knight c7 check and attack the rook and the king. But actually, the better move that you're really threatening is bishop c7. So the best move here for black is rook a5. And then when white takes, black takes, and now you've got two pieces for the rook, which is great for black. And really, white has no more counterplay without the dark squares, without the dark square bishop to take advantage of all of this space here. So he's not going to take, so maybe he'll play, for example, knight c7. Now, really importantly, we don't play rook a6, because if you play rook a6, then now when you play here, knight c7, king e7, you can play bishop c5, and the rook isn't defending the bishop. So instead we prefer, well, and just to clarify, that's pretty bad because you can't play d6. That will lead to checkmate with the queen takes. You can't play king here because the knights, you've got to play back here, which means I can then take the rook and then take the bishop. And white is just winning in this position. Obviously, it's just a lot of material up. So we don't like that. So we play rook a5 instead. And that's pretty nice because now white doesn't have all of these tips and tricks. But anyway, I digress. We'll go back to the line. So white, Hans, obviously didn't play this. It's not really considered mainline theory. It's a bit of a trick, really. If you don't know the theory, then it might be hard to work out. But obviously at this level, these guys know all their theory, especially when they prepared for this game. So Hans plays the much better and much more solid bishop e3, 6 bishop e3. A6 is very important here to stop a new move on the board. I'll come back to that. So a6, very important to stop the knight coming to b5. Queen d2, standard development. And actually here you can start to see, so knight f6, also standard development. And here white has a decision to make. Because at some point he's going to have to choose where to put these two pawns. Does he play f4 and go for this sort of Grand Prix type format pawn structure? Or does he instead go f3 and g4 in a sort of English attack type format instead? And then there's some very interesting theory with both of those. I would say that the f3 g4 is more of an aggressive, I'll throw the kitchen sink at you type position and type game. So we'll see what he does. But actually Hans plays a clever move here, which is castles queenside, and he delays this decision to be made because ultimately, you know, the more flexible you can be, the better. And in this position, you know, if black were to commit in some way, you know, for example, if you were to play d6, then maybe f4 might be better if you're planning on pushing somewhere over here. But something like bishop e7, which is what was played on the board by Bacrot, then he might go for f3, which Hans has, in fact. And, you know, the idea is that we might be going for some sort of all-out attack. And so black responds with a similar idea. So now, let's take that arrow off the board. Now black is saying, okay, your king is on my side of the board now. You've got this queen eyeing up the king. And this should shape up for an interesting game. I could predict a very tactical, very aggressive game from both sides. It could be very interesting. So white plays knight takes knight. This is obviously this simplification makes things slightly less aggressive in the middle of the board. And now black has two options. He can play d takes or queen takes. And instinctively, I think a lot of players will want to play queen takes so that you can keep this file open. But in reality, in the long term, and obviously these super grandmasters, they're thinking in the very long term, with their extensive experience on pawn structures and positional play, whilst it's all very exciting to talk about the possibility of queen takes over d takes, and really going for maybe right click so I can attack the king here. There we go. Whilst this is possible, and this looks like a fun idea, at the end of the day, white's king can just shuffle to one side, and there's nothing tangible. So that at least at this moment in time, there is nothing that's immediately going to be giving black an advantage or giving black some compensation. Whereas in this position, you are in fact also not just keeping your C file open, but you are keeping the D file open for white onto a backwards pawn. And this is what I was saying about the thinking ahead, right? So what could happen, what you could see happen in a line like this, is where maybe white moves the king along, black castles, maybe we throw some pawns, and now like this pawn can't really ever go to d5, because if it goes to d5, we have g5, which is problematic. There's some complicated lines with this, but actually, as you'll see from the bar on the left here, white comes out on top, and it's really about the momentum that with this g pawn attacking and the pressure that white has on the center. So instead, what I think probably what Bacrot will do is take on c6 with the pawn, so that there is no backward pawn on this file. The file is now open for both sides, and black still has a lot of compensation for this, because realistically, it's never going to be a backward pawn on the c file. White can't get control of that c5 square quick enough, and so he's going to be able to throw his pawns at the king really quick. I'm just gonna have a look on the chat here. Yeah, it seems that Lichess had accidentally swapped the colors, but Hans is definitely white here. And shaping up to be an interesting game at the very top level of chess. So very exciting to watch. In terms of the theory, I think here, after D takes, you've got a lot of interesting ideas, and it could go a lot of different ways. In particular, I would say probably white is going to be pushing on this side. Black would probably be pushing on this side. So that could get interesting. Alternatively, they could go for a very positional game, but I think in reality, you don't, certainly at this level, you don't play, well, at any level, you don't play a Sicilian Taimanov for the positional play, really. It's a very tactical opening. And Hans is not one to shy away from this, of course. So I think we could get an interesting tactical battle here. I think after D takes, we could probably have Queen F2 on the board as well, to try and take a little more control of those dark squares. That's a candidate move. I think I always teach, whenever I'm teaching, and I teach the juniors, I always try and point out that there are candidate moves in every position, and you should consider the main ones before doing anything. Oh, we've had D takes C6 on the board as predicted. He took to be honest, I'm surprised that he took so long to think about that, just because, well, I imagine that this would have been somewhere in his preparation, unless he was surprised somehow, but that would surprise me. And also, if he's playing the Taimanov, I imagine he's familiar with these kind of positions. So a little surprised that he took a while to think about that, but he could be just settling into the game. But anyway, we'll see how much longer he spends on the next few moves. But as I said, we've got Queen F2 and G4 is probably the main candidate moves, and it seems that Hans has gone with the first option that I gave, which is g4. This immediately grabs space, yeah, on the king side, and also really dares black to go, okay, go on, castle king side, I'm coming for you. So testing Bacrot's nerves here. We'll see which way he goes, but realistically, he can't go queenside. The d file won't really allow for that very much. That's quite difficult. Of course, it is possible. For example, if you played bishop d7, g5, knight h5, f4. As soon as you go this way, these dark squares become a problem. So queen f2 is a really strong move. You have no escape if you ever need to, because the d file is open. You'll have, I'm sure most people watching will have heard of the adage, don't move your pawns on the side you're being attacked. And you want your pawns in front of your king here, not out in front like this. So it's just not very, it is possible, but I certainly don't think it's likely in this game or preferable for black. So he either stays where he is or he castles kingside, and Hans knows this, so he's preempting the castle kingside to say, okay, I'm going to come for you if you do. And if he stays in the middle, well, that could lead to opening up after pushing the knight away. Maybe it could lead to opening up the center as well. So if black doesn't get a move, and I think this is where this to and fro comes from, the need to attack on both sides. If black doesn't sort of start with some aggressive play, start building some momentum on the queen side, it will let white just, run rampant on the king side and really make life difficult for black. Just looking at the chat, I should have probably started by introducing myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Watley. I am a candidate master from Gibraltar. I am, at the moment, just commentating on streams. I haven't got my own channel. Well, I have my own channel, but absolutely no content on there whatsoever yet. But it is something I'm looking into. So if you think I should get into that streaming life, then do comment, let me know. I've just seen Gibraltar ? Yes, Gibraltar at the southernmost tip of the Iberian Peninsula, so just below Spain. It's a British overseas territory. I was born there, grew up there, lived there all my life. And in chess, you might have heard of it from the Gibraltar Chess Festival, which only recently stopped running, but went on for a good, I would guess, about 15, 16, 17 years, and was a major part of my chess career growing up. And I got to meet all sorts of players from all over the world, all players that you'll have heard of, I'm sure, and got to know a few of them as well, which was really, really exciting. Some of the highlights, meeting Magnus Carlsen, meeting Hikaru Nakamura, probably the most famous streamer, really, at least the most famous male streamer. Who else? Ivanchuk. Just too many to name, really. One of my sort of closer friends in that time, although I was only little myself, was Simon Williams, Ginger GM, who you'll all know probably if you watch any streaming. And he used to call me Mini Ginger GM. That's one for the ages. So shout out to Ginger GM. If you haven't checked out his channel, he's really entertaining, really exciting player. So his streams are always very interesting. And I'll get back to me in the chat in a second, but I think we've had some moves on the board. So e5, very dynamic move. I'm very impressed with that, frankly. Of course, I shouldn't be surprised. He is a Super Grandmaster. But I very much like this move. Aside from it being the best move in the position, realistically, alongside castling, As I said, white is going to go for it, right? So black can castle and say, well, come get me. And he probably will end up doing that. But what this e5 move does is sort of breaks up the momentum a little bit, gains some space back. Yeah, so opening up the bishop, putting another pawn in the center, covering this space, also stopping, or at least at least making it slightly harder for white to play f4. He's got the bishop on the g4 pawn if he does as well. Also brings up a space for bishop e6, which is a really nice place for the bishop. There's not really many other places for it to go, because on d7 it will just become an oversized pawn, and on b7 it will just it would just hit some white pawns, and is also anyway stuck behind a black pawn. So yeah, I like this e5 move. I think it also doesn't commit immediately to going that way, even though we kind of assume he is going to go that way. At least it gives him a little more time. On the flip side, if he is going to go that way, you could argue that it's better to get it out the way and over and done with. But hey, I think we're talking semantics here. So let's say, so in fact, I was going to say, let's say Hans plays h4, but in fact, he has played h4. And he is, as predicted, setting up this pawn structure to start pushing on the king side. I think it's interesting. You get a lot of interesting dynamics here as to whether to play which pawn to push first. So I mean, g5 being sort of an obvious choice. Let's say bishop e6 is played. G5 is the obvious choice to many. But the problem with this is that it leaves this gaping hole on h5, and black can really sort of set up camp there. Either you can sort of come down here or play g6 and drop back. And it really halts white. It's not impenetrable for white. He can get there in the end, I'm sure, but the point is that it slows down the momentum. And in this type of game, it's all about slowing down the momentum, because if black can gain a few moves to hold him off a little bit, well, then black can start pushing, and maybe in that time he'll make things really difficult for white to get things moving again. He's going to gain some a tempo or some tempi and move the knight around. Potentially could play rook d8 to sort of disrupt white's d-file control here. So it's not terrible, but I wouldn't say probably it's the best in this position. h5 really has two benefits, which is one, that it stops the knight h5 after g5, so it does threaten g5, and two, it does give the eventual possibility of pushing here and disrupting the black kingside pawns, but again allows black to slow the momentum with g6 and sort of hold off white for a little longer. So in fact, ideally, I would say you want to play other way around. You want to play h5 then g5 and then maybe g6, so that you're definitely ensuring that something is taken, because both pawns are attacked and the g file will be opened, or an h file, or something will be opened. But obviously that takes a few moves, so we'll see what Bacrot comes up with to fight that. And it looks like bishop e6 has been played on the board. g5 has been played. Knight h5. Now, I think personally g5 is a slight, sorry, Hans, I think that could be a slight inaccuracy. But I mean, he is a super GM for a reason. There could very well be an intense prep going on here. He's played very quickly, so I assume he has thought this through and probably played this position out in his preparation plentyfold. So I'm sure he has a good plan. Of course, it's not unplayable, and the when I say inaccuracy, I'm really talking about the finest measures here. Personally, I don't think that would be my choice, but I'm very interested to see what he comes up with, because I think in general this line has been, I wouldn't say refuted is far too strong a word, but at least I think some of the enthusiasm was taken away when in the Taimanov Bible book that I mentioned earlier, this line is covered extensively with black as a really good system to slow that momentum for white. So yeah, we'll see what comes of that. So knight h5 has been played on the board. Let's take off all these arrows. And I think some candidate moves. We've got queen h2 to try and cover any sort of advance from the black knight here. Queen h2 also pins the queen. Now, of course, there's not really very much to happen right now about that. We can't really take too much advantage, but a pin is a pin, and it's never wasted, or very rarely wasted, and you never know when it could come up at some point in the game to be very useful. It also ties the queen to the black queen to the defense of the e5 pawn. So I quite like queen h2. You could play rook g1 to stop rook g3, but in general, it feels like this rook should be staying on that h file, to be honest. So I'm not too keen on that. You can just ignore him and play king b1. That's a possibility too. But anyway, I believe a move has been played. Let's see what the... Oh, no. No move has been played. Oh, hang on. I've confused myself. Sorry, ignore me. G5 has not been played. Ignore me. I got confused by my own analysis. Seems G5 has not been played, so I can take back my apology to Hans, because he didn't play the move that I thought was an inaccuracy. Whoops. I am indeed just analyzing some candidate moves. This is now the live board that I'm on. So yeah, thank you for your forgiveness, chat. Apologies for that poor reporting on my part. It seems, however, queen f2 has been played, a move that I suggested earlier, as controlling these dark squares. I think that's one nice thing that happens a lot in the Taimanov, that you do get a lot of similar themes, and if you understand those themes, it becomes quite easy to play. Well, I say easy. At least it becomes much more enjoyable to play, because you have, it gives you so much to work with. All these themes can mix together in lots of different ways, which is really exciting and something I really love about the opening. Yeah, you are quite right. If it was I was quite surprised. I mean, that was just my opinion that it was an inaccuracy. We've got someone saying if it was an inaccuracy, I should have assumed that it wasn't played by Hans. I was a little surprised, but bear with me. I'm a little new to this. I think he. I still think it's playable. I still think it's an idea. And to be quite honest, if he did play it, I would assume, like I said, that he had something backing it up. I assume that there would be something that I don't know about in that line. But assuming he does not play it, I'm going to assume that I do know things about that line, and in fact, that would be an inaccuracy. But that's just my opinion for now. Okay, so we have the live board, and just to carry on with story time from earlier. The Gibraltar Chess Open, I think the Gibraltar Chess Festival I was discussing earlier. Simon Williams, Ginger GM, some great names. The very best name, if you can beat, Carlsen and Nakamura and etc., would be Boris Spassky, who I became friends with, and I'm really privileged to say that I became friends with him. I was only, I'd been 8 when I met him, and he was such a kind man. and that's a whole story for later that I'll keep in the bank for when things slow down again. Do I admire Bobby Fischer? I assume that was directed at me in the chat. I mean, I think anyone who doesn't is well. I guess define your question. Do you mean as a person or as a game? As a player. I think anyone who denies him being one of the best players in the world ever is well, I think that would be a very unpopular opinion. So I mean, he's one of the greats whose games you should study if you want to improve. It's the way to go for sure. One of the few that you should unnegotiably study when you're improving in chess. We did, in fact, we didn't quite discuss the politics around it. I think Spassky had a bad rap from the fact that he was, from America's point of view, obviously on the wrong side of the Cold War, if you're American. And so I think people didn't really know him as the person and don't know him as the person that he is. But when I met him, it's funny you mentioned Bobby Fischer, because this very funny thing happened where I was 8 years old, and he was at the just visiting. He wasn't playing. He was at the Gibraltar Chess Festival, and he was playing for. So he was just playing like in the bar, and he was just having a good time. He wasn't playing properly, and he comes into the dining area, sits down. The closing gala is just about to finish, and comes in, sits down, and starts eating. And I see him, and I'm a bit nervous to go up and speak to him, but I'm with my dad, and he says, "Go for it. Just what have you got to lose? Go and say hello." So I go and say hello, and I walk up to him, tiny me, and say, "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Spassky. I'm sorry to bother you. Would you mind signing this program for me?" And he looked me up and down, all sort of 5 foot of me, maybe not even, and looks me up and down and says, "Why, of course. What's your name? Come, sit down." And he signed my program, and he was having dinner with these two nice gentlemen, one standing, one sitting, and I didn't think much of it because I was 8 years old. I later found out that these were his bodyguards. I just obliviously walked up to this man with 2 bodyguards and demanded a signature, his autograph. Anyway, and he was very, very nice, and he said, "Hopefully one day I'll see you, playing in those big tournaments. I'll see you up there one day." And I was like, I hope so, Mr. Spassky, because he was asking me where I was from, and that I was saying that I was homegrown and etc. from Gibraltar. Anyway, and very nice interaction. And then he goes away for the year, and I will come back with part 2 of that story in a second, after I've just finished discussing Bishop b4 on the board, which is a very interesting move. The computer doesn't like it, I imagine, judging by this evaluation bar. Probably because I think Bishop b4 is based on a tactical idea to sort of obviously to disrupt the pawn structure on the king side. But actually, I'm not entirely sure if white cares. So I think black is threatening to play bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop takes a2. So for example, bishop h3, we could see this on the board. This is the threat. But actually, this isn't a threat because, in fact, in this position, bishop b6 is an incredibly strong move. And suddenly, black is just nowhere to go and nothing to do. If you were to go back, you're playing rook d7, and all of white's pieces are coming out to play. and all for the sake of this a pawn. So this is really a poison pawn. So more so it's to disrupt the pawn structure than to take on a2. From Oreo Smurf, what was your question? You said about you're calling it now that Hans will break Fischer's record. Which record are you talking about? Please let us know. So yeah, this would be terrible, obviously, for black. So that's not what Etienne has in plan, of course. And I think that probably the computer doesn't like it because it's not forcing enough. It's not pushing these pawns. It's not opening files. It's and of course it's potentially giving up the double bishop pair, which in general the computer doesn't like. We'll see. I think probably bishop h3 is probably the move to play here. Maybe if he really doesn't want to let this happen, I really don't think it matters because at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure what the big deal is. But I mean, for example, bishop h3 takes, queen a5 is probably the plan. You know, I think the computer won't like it. I'm just going to explore this idea. I quite like this idea. Okay, the computer does not like it because of bishop c4. Yeah, that's quite a valid point. Never mind, we'll ignore that. If the bishop wasn't there, see why e5 was quite a good move, because if the bishop wasn't there, if the bishop was, you know, on this diagonal instead, then we could play something like this and ignore the fact that he's there. And then you've got this nice little sort of fortress going on, except it's royally messed up by bishop c4. So maybe not there. So queen a5 is probably the idea. And the computer suddenly changed its mind. So, see, computers can't be trusted, it seems. I imagine bishop c5, queen takes a2, maybe queen takes c3. I prefer queen takes c3, to be honest. King b1, knight d7. But I do like black's play here. I mean, it's got a lot of potential. I think, though, probably white's saving grace is that if this doesn't work for black, if he finds some way out of it, you know, got very nice structure here and can very quick, you know, if black doesn't keep the pressure up, you can very quickly start pushing for things on the d file and on the king side. So yeah, very back and forth play and ideas here. Said 2,900 ELO and 30 World Championships. I mean, 2,900 ELO, that's pretty ambitious. That's total domination, obviously. With only Carlsen being the person that's been able to dream of that, really. I don't know. Why not? Never say never. Right, hang on. Yeah, I mean, you've got to respect the greats, of course. But I think probably, I don't know, obviously as a player who's been on the circuit myself, you don't really concern yourself with records so much. Really, you're focusing on, you know, I think probably for Hans, like he obviously the records and the goals are incredible to have, but I think you probably don't want to focus too much on it, because at the end of the day, what you want to focus on is playing incredible chess and playing some games that will be, I think, much more of a flex, as it were, is to play games that will be studied for generations. than it is to have a certain rating or a certain title. If you can be one of the true greats, that's what's Capablanca and all the world champion, Capablanca, Alaska, Kramnik, all these Botvinnik, all these players have study-worthy games, and I think that's what makes them so great. Yes, they're world champions, but I mean, Topalov was a world champion, and I don't think, I mean, obviously incredible player and a lot of respect for him, and I met him in fact, but in Gibraltar, and seems a very lovely guy. But I think he is not spoken in the same breath as players like Kramnik, Botvinnik, Lasker, Mikhail Tal, all of these players, because they have study-worthy games, and so many of them. So I'm sure that if Hans can do that, that will be, I mean, I think that's a dream of any chess player who wants to make it big. Okay, we've had some exciting moves on the board. White place, we had a comment earlier. I'm going to get back to the current chat that they're talking about in a second. And exactly, study-worthy games speak for themselves. Just had on the chat that, and that's exactly the point. And I think, and they're timeless. If they're study-worthy, they're timeless, and they stay there for generations and generations. And no title, realistically, titles come and go, and records come and go. They're invariably, they're always broken within a couple of decades. Whereas, study-worthy games, you see games that are studied from 100 years ago, that's timeless. So anyway, and I also think that discussing, if Fischer played Hans right now, Hans would win. Well, probably, but it's a bit like comparing, in my opinion, it's a bit like comparing money from then and now. Maybe £10 or $10, depending on where you're watching from. Maybe £10, £10 from then, as its face value, £10 is the same as £10 today, right? But £10 50, 60 years ago, I'm sure is worth 10 or 100 times that original £10. So I don't think you can compare like that. I never agree with comparing like that. But okay, back to the game. Bishop c5. Engine clearly doesn't like this move. I wonder why. So I think Engine, I think when I played Bishop h3, it liked that. So yeah, I think that's probably its top move. I think the key is actually that you don't take back, but actually you ignore it, and you play. So you first of all play Bishop e6 to stop the queen invading. Very clever intermediate move, yeah. So intermediate move, a move where you're playing, where you're sort of expected to capture back or expected to react a certain way to a move, and you throw a move in that gains a tempo to get in between. And of course, black can win a pawn here, but it's not really worth very much. It's not really worth a pawn, because probably it's more worth black's time to have the white pawn blocking sort of these defensive lines for white than it is to just not have it there at all. The position isn't open enough to be okay with, to be wanting to just open a file there. It's not open enough for them to attack, for black to attack it. So I think the idea would be Bishop e6, and now b takes c3, and then something like knight d7 and bishop a5. And okay, we have a fairly docile version of what could be, but white has the two bishops, is no material down, and if he takes, then he's using up more moves to do this. Could potentially, if he takes, you can play g5 and threaten the knight. All of white's pieces are active, and this is worth much more than anything black has realistically. The queen is kind of stuck. The knight isn't very active. The only piece that the rooks are stuck at home. Sorry about that. The rooks are stuck at home. And ultimately, black just doesn't have enough activity to do anything with this position. So I think this would have been potentially preferable, or at least a good option, but I haven't really investigated bishop c5 in depth. They've played a lot of moves very well by comparison, in relativity to the rest of the game. I think they've played a lot of moves pretty quickly. So they'll have a good think now. You'll see often grandmasters do that. They think for a while and then they play their line very quickly because they've calculated their line and there's no need to think about it much more. And that's their sort of efficient way of time managing. So they've played a few quick moves now. I think they'll take their time again. In particular, I think Étienne will take his time, as it seems Hans is using his opponent's time very well to think. So yeah, okay, so bishop c5. It's an interesting idea. I mean, clearly speaking to the concept that if you were to, if black were to take on c3, white is just better, I think. So b takes c3, knight c7. I might just let you take that, to be fair. Develop my bishop somewhere. Maybe play a3 so that he can't take the pawn. So, for example, something like this would be very good for white, because now also it's very difficult for black to castle. He also can't play queen e7 to stop it, because then I'll play queen takes c6. So I think, so for example, he probably won't take there, even in that position. If I play a3, probably take the opportunity to try and castle, or do something. So like to try and put pressure on to castle, like queen a5. But yeah, it's just really difficult for black, in my opinion. So I quite like the idea that Hans has had here. It's basically saying, well, if you do what you're planning to do, I've just got control of the dark squares, and that's worth much more than my messed up pawns. Or even if you win one of them, the dark square control and the double bishops is going to be worth much more than that to me. That's what he's saying, I think, about bishop c5. But if you play bishop takes c5, which is what's happened on the board, I think those are the only realistic candidate moves here. Just looking at the chat, sorry. Lee Chess already showing the next few moves. I actually don't know. Sorry, I can't answer your question if the stream has the games on delay. I think they normally do, but I don't know. What I do know is that there have been a few extra moves played already, just a couple, but I'm really trying to delve into this, so I can just skip ahead and show you that bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, knight d7, queen a3 has happened on the board, but that is a lot to digest, I think. But I tell you what, we will first have a look at the difference between this position and here. The evaluation has clearly gone down a little for white. But white is also maintaining that idea that we discussed, saying, hey, you are not going to castle, your king is staying in the middle, so when I open up this position, you're going to be in trouble. But I quite like queen b6 here for black. This could be a nice move, obviously threatening b4 to win the knight, and forcing more or less queen d6, because oh, hang on. Yeah, so I think queen d6 is probably the best move. And then maybe queen c5 to try and castle, and then I don't know why the computer likes black too much. I think it's probably just like it's a little uncomfortable for black at the moment, but I think probably the point is that at some point, like realistically, these are a little, I don't know, they're not too comfortable. They can be attacked fairly easily. Black can come at you this way as well. And I think ultimately white's entire play at the moment rests on the fact that black can't castle, and really Hans doesn't have very much at the moment to back it up. Nothing to throw at him, no cool ideas and tactics. Well, at least none that I'm seeing or the computer's coming up with. Sort of got no ammunition. He set up this great big battery on the D file, getting ready to fire a lovely diagonal here, and he's got nothing to fire with, no bullets to fire with. So I don't know about this position really. I think I would probably take black. I'm afraid, which is a shame for Hans. But I mean, it's nothing major. The difference is probably something like 0.3, like minus 0.3 in this position. Certainly nothing too life-threatening, as it were. And there's a lot of chess to be played still. But if we're interested, yeah, I was actually just about to say, if you're interested, knight d5 looks really interesting. Knight d5 is possible, but I think it doesn't quite work because of a little intermediate move. So takes, cool idea, very cool idea. Because if you don't take, then what's black doing, right? Because she's got a cool knight in the middle of the board. He's got to go back to d8 to stop queen e7 mate, and that's just ugly. So he's gonna take. Takes, and now b4 is this really cool move, and I just think white doesn't have enough for this. Queen b3, knight c5, queen e3, bishop d7, and now he's escaped, and now he's a piece up. Of course, white has a lot of compensation, but is it enough for a piece to 2 pawns? I don't know. Also, white isn't that well developed. And again, just lacking a bit of ammunition. I think something like this, attempt to swap off queens quickly, put some pressure on white. Black wants to be swapping off here. This would be good. So it seems that we have, it did it for me, thank you, chess.com. It went back to the main game. It seems that queen a3 happened as we were looking at, and then queen b6 happened as I predicted, and queen d6 happened, which in fact is probably the only move in this position that still keeps white solidly in the game. I think if you start playing knight d5, you're at something like minus 1.5, and at this level, Étienne should be able to close that out. So a lot of tactics going on. There's still a game to be played for sure, but I think it's grasping at straws there, really. If you're playing knight d5, it's not solid enough to play. After b4, and you get and black gets to keep the piece, and white really doesn't have very much without the knight going on. So yeah. So we have queen d6 on the board. I think there's a lot of options here. Quite an interesting one that I like, actually, is castles queenside. Finally get out of that issue of not being able to castle and just go, okay, I'll go the other way. I quite like that. And both players look calm and focused. Normally they do, to be fair, I think. That's their style, really, both of them. You'll have to Benzoned asking me any reason I didn't take part in the BCC. I assume you mean the British Chess Championships. Yes, actually, well, a couple of reasons. One being that I'm a master's student and I'm finishing off my master's studies. So certainly couldn't take 2 weeks out to do that, unfortunately. But actually, if anyone looks me up on FIDE, you'll see that I haven't. Well, I played one game in the past 5 years because unfortunately I suffered a head injury that stopped me playing for a while. But I think you'll be pleased to know I'm heading back to playing again, and I played my first game, my first classical game, first rated game in 4.5 years, something like that, almost 5 years. Towards the end of last year, and won. It was against an experienced player who had been above 2200 before. A lot of a strong player and a tricky player, and actually I blundered very quickly. That's what lack of practice does to you. But I managed to get enough compensation for it and claw my way back and win with the black pieces in the end. So it was really nice to come back, and I am coming back. Once I'm done with my masters, I'll be able to focus on that a lot more, and it's partly why I'm doing this, to get back into the game, really, as it were. Yeah, the pun was not intended about heading back, but well noticed. And by the way, if I was asked if I'm a streamer earlier, if you do if you do think that I should get going with that, please let me know. Feel free to, if you look me up on anything really as Stephen AJ Watley, spelt the same as the name on the overlay here, but all one word, on Instagram, on Twitch. I think you should be able to find and follow me. And I'm very interested in sort of building a chess community, and like talking to people about chess with their questions and discussing positions. I do a nice, unfortunately, Instagram being Instagram logged me out of my Instagram randomly a while back, and so I had to start again. But I was doing this thing that I'd like to start again, which is my followers versus another page's followers, another chess page's followers, in like a story competition. So put a puzzle up, give some options, see what percentage of my followers get it right, and see what percentage of another streamer's or another page's followers get it right. So if you'd like to take part in that, also go and check out my Instagram and get in touch. So anyway, enough about me. Let's get back to the game. In fact, Castle's Queenside has been played. I think, oh, I don't know why it says Queen C5. Queen D6. The options were, after the computers thought about it a bit, it looks like it likes Castle's Queenside. It didn't originally, but as it's gone in depth more, it does. It shows the human touch sometimes knows better. Queen C5, I think the problem is there's no urgency, there's nothing threatened. And Rook C8, likewise, maybe you're threatening to play C5, but then you don't really want to play that and give the knight some space on D5. So so I really like Castle's Queenside from Étienne. I think that's probably the best move. And we've got about a minus 0.3 to 0.5 variance here, with black having the very slight advantage. Yeah, interesting position, I think. I don't think black is really threatening anything per se by moving the knight. Immediately, alarm bells are going to ring that your rook is on the same file as the queen. So you instinctively, as a player, want to move that out of the way, of course. But I think actually, when you look at the squares that black can go to, in both cases, you can take on E5 and have no problems. So I don't think there's an immediate threat. So I think Hans can start looking at. He's got a lot of time on the clock. I think it might be a good time to take some, and I think he might take a decent amount of time thinking here, to go over his options on how to improve his position. And I think you'll see these peaks and troughs where lots of stuff happens, and then then suddenly it's clearly a moment for reflection. And I think that's what a lot of the top players do, is they recognize those moments for reflection, those moments where you really need to spend a lot of your time thinking to work out your plan for the, how you're going to set up your pieces, what your general understanding of this position is, and how, because that's so important as well in every position. So I just had in chat, thought knight c5 and b4 was a threat. So why don't we have a look at that? So depends obviously what white does, but let's say rook h2 or something to bring the rook along. So if knight c5, queen takes e4, I assume I can simply either take or go knight b1, but let's say take, and then knight d1, because I prefer my knight on this side to go to e3 maybe. Or else I could come back to b1 and go to d2, or I could have before. I can't really now. I'm not sure this is a threat. I think, well, I mean, the computer seems to be showing it as level. I don't think it's a major threat for sure. My instinct's clearly off because the computer is not agreeing with me, but I thought that queen a5 was clever. Oh, but white has a wonderful, that's why white has a wonderfully clever move. So of course this pin exists, and whilst I'd noticed that, I thought actually that would work to black's favor, that maybe you could get a discovered check here and then take the queen. But actually white has this really beautiful move, bishop takes a6. Well, black can't take it with the knight, can take it with the queen, but then, well, okay, we've just swapped off some pieces, and now white has a lot of space, some extra pawns, and this isn't really a possibility because, well, I can do a bit of checking here and there, make sure that I win some pawns back. Well, back, I say, win all of the pawns, and then when convenient, I can either go queen a3 or queen c3, check, and b4, and then black has no checks going on. So this really nice move b4 here, and black just has nothing, which I think is interesting. Yeah, so white's just clearly winning here. Yeah, computer clearly agrees. So really nice move that stops queen a5, and of course I'm sure that that kind of depth is the kind of depth that these guys go into when they're calculating. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's gone through at least one of their heads. But this is the position we have on the board. I hope that FK Gan, I hope that covers your question about knight c5. It's an interesting question. A2 pawn is always hanging. I think the point is that white doesn't really care about the A2 pawn. It's only in an endgame that it's going to become important, and we're a long way from that, by which time we could well be winning other pawns back. And even then the king is close to the A file if it really got to an endgame where the A pawn became an issue. So I don't think the A pawn is a big deal in this game, and I think that's why it's often hanging in a lot of these calculations. The only reason that it's useful is if it's going to stop some kind of sort of b3 threat, which is a long way off as well. So because if they were to go b3, then you can go c3 and you're all covered for a little while anyway, especially with the queen able to track back to a3. So yeah, that's where we're at. Interesting position. And I think it's probably a good time, what Hans thinks, to let everyone have a think as well. We'll just have a couple minutes break shortly. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back after our 5 minute break. I am, as I was before, candidate master Stephen Watley, commentating on the Hans Niemann against the world event, in which Hans Niemann himself is playing Étienne Bacrot. And we are at the live position since our 5 minute break. One move has happened on the board, and that move is bishop e2, which the computer clearly doesn't like, as you can see the board going down extensively here with the evaluation. And I am curious as to why, because I don't see any immediate threat from black. So that's got me thinking. Any thoughts from the chat are most welcome. And if you are on Instagram, then you'll see we had some comments earlier about Bobby Fischer. I took in the break. I took the liberty of checking out Grandmaster Niemann's Instagram account, and in fact, he himself pays homage to the great Bobby Fischer, calling him the world's greatest chess player, ever, and that he's paved the way for so many, which will lead me nicely in a minute, once we've discussed Bishop E2, to my story about Boris Spassky. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so Bishop E2, I think it probably doesn't like it because maybe it thinks it's passive. It's not really doing very much. I think other moves that it liked were Rook H2 to bring around to D2. That's not a very easy move to see. I mean, I'm sure Hans has seen it. I think in a game for a lot of players, that's not an easy move to see. But it's a really nice one. And I think obviously a player of that standard will have seen this idea of the rook lift, of swinging the rook round to get it helping on this file. And I think that would mean that potentially it's not really pinned because you're not losing it, but potentially you could cause a problem along that file at some point with this battery. Gives you a lot of strength on this file, and also means that, for example, in the event of rook e8 and moving the queen and whatever, moving the knight out the way, when the queen takes, you're not taking back with the king or with the knight. You've got another rook to help you, and your rook over here on h1 is really the only piece at the moment that has absolutely nothing to do with the position. So I think I would have preferred rook h2. Bishop e2 is the next best move on the computer. So I don't know why it's saying it's dubious, because I think it's perfectly valid. And I don't know why it's swung so significantly. But I think that's probably indicative of the position, that this is not a easy position to play for either side, but particularly for white here. I think particularly white's position is not necessarily worse, or it certainly wasn't in this position. It's not necessarily too much worse, but practically very difficult position to play, I think. So interesting. I'll just check out the chat. Okay, that's that done. My phone is playing up, so I can't see your chat. Sorry. Right, got it. This song is incredibly good. I don't know about what song you're talking about, but I'll believe you. Talk about uni chess, happily. University chess. I think in general for top level players, university chess is not really a consideration in general. Just because I think, and I think it's the case a lot of the time in chess, that realistically you have to go where the good chess is. It's very rarely where you are already, and so that the same goes at uni, right? So really the only interesting thing that sort of happens is when there's a world uni championships or whatever, and maybe within your university, depends on the university, but like universities like Oxford and Cambridge, in the UK at least, those are the ones that I can speak for. And those universities often have very strong players. So that's a common thing. I think certainly in the UK you have chess societies, so basically chess clubs at uni, and they're fun, but I think they're more social on the most part than they are competitive. That's my take on uni chess. At least that's been my experience. In regards to the other comments, yes, absolutely. Sorry, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but Gusala. Absolutely, same goes for black. It is a tricky situation, tricky position to navigate. But I think the reason that I say it's slightly more so for white is just that I think there's more on the line for white. So, for example, black has a lot of moves that are just okay. Like they're not losing, they're okay. So black could play queen e3, black could play a5, black could play h5, black could play rook a e8. Probably even get away with queen c7. There are very few moves for black, I think, that immediately lose or like are significantly bad. I mean, Miles, you've put quite right that if you move the knight, you don't want to move the knight yet, but so that makes it difficult. But aside from that, I think black has a lot of options, whereas white has to be really careful. For example, he's only got one square for his knight to go to. His bishop is sort of hitting nothing. His bishop can't really go anywhere. His queen is in enemy territory, and could potentially get trapped if he's not careful. I mean, obviously at this, Hans is not going to let that happen. I'm just saying that in general, it's something that he should be, well, he's going to be aware of, and that makes it more difficult. It's just something else nagging you, and also something else that makes things difficult to play. For example, knight d5 might be a great move in a lot of positions, but in this one, maybe not, because the queen complicates things massively. Yeah. I think, let's say rook he8 is played. Knight d5 loses horribly, right? Because you've got this, and you can't take back with the pawn because you lose the queen. So then you've got to swap the queens, and by the time you've done that, well, the bishop's out anyway. So you can't do that. Whereas if this queen was, let's say it was, I don't know, back here, or I can't even manufacture this. Let's move it out the way, right? If it was out the way, well, maybe we could play here, because, and you'll see the evaluation bar going up a lot. Now we can play this because the queen's out the way. But this queen being on this square in the enemy camp is problematic. This is not possible anymore. And I think that was the main exciting tactic in the position for white. So without that, I don't know what white's plan is, to be quite honest. I don't know what he's going for here. In answer to your question, Miles, is the black advantage because of the queen trap idea after rook he8? I think it's because, I mean, the queen trap idea isn't actually going to trap the queen, as in it's sort of a vague threat, but it's not a concrete threat, right? It's not like this happens, then this, sorry, it's not like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. This is very what will be kind of thing. But I'm just going to put pressure on you and see what happens. I think that's more of the kind of situation that we're in. So, I think it's more, I think the black advantage is more related, personally, I think it's more related to the fact that white doesn't have many plans in this position. White's pieces are generally not so active, or at least have less potential to be active, which is probably worse than being less active. And they don't really have anywhere to go. And white doesn't really have a very obvious plan as to how he can move forward with the game and with the position. In fairness, as was pointed out earlier, both sides for both sides that's true. It's not entirely clear how you continue, but I think for white in particular, the bishop has nowhere to go, the knight has nowhere to go, this rook is doing nothing, this queen is struggling. Well, it's not struggling yet, but it's stunting a lot of the other ideas that we could be playing. Which is problematic. Potentially we could go queen e7, try and go queen e7, depending on what black plays, to get out this way if we need to. And, threaten that knight d5 idea. Yeah, I don't know. I think the black advantage is a little overestimated here by the computer, personally. I don't think it's minus 1.2, which is what it's at the moment. It's I would say minus 0.8. Personally, that's what if I was in the game now myself, I would in my head be evaluating it as slightly worse for myself, I think. I'm sure Hans will have that self-awareness too, unless this was part of the plan all along, but I imagine he's probably feeling like this is not exactly how he wanted the game to go so far. But I don't know. I didn't prepare him, so so I can't really confirm or deny that. Oh, we have another move on the board. Knight c5, which has been tainted as a I don't know what the X means, but I'm going to assume a blunder, or just a bad move probably rather than a blunder. Yeah, I agree, Mikey. White has no plan, but I think black's just given him a way out. I don't really understand why he's done that before playing something like rook e8. There's no rush, I don't think, for black in this position. I don't understand why he doesn't play rook e8, personally, or a5, or even queen e3 and then king b7. But knight c5, I don't get it. Surely he's got to go queen takes e5, unless it's something I'm missing. Queen e7 is just going further into the belly of the beast, as it were. This way you just nick an extra pawn, and central, it's an important pawn. I mean, the computer likes this for white as well. Could it be bad because of b4, knight h? I assume you mean knight a4. Sorry, I don't know what you mean, Barbie. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm with you. I've caught up now. Yeah, black could even play king b7 and rook c8. That's also a possibility. I don't understand the rush with knight c5. He must have some concrete line that we haven't seen. Okay, so f6. I assume queen f4 now. There's nowhere else really to go. Queen h2 is a bit rubbish. Might as well go queen f4. No reason not to. So I'm pretty sure we'll see that on the board next. I doubt Bacrot is throwing. That's I think he must have a plan. I don't imagine he would have just gone, no, I don't know what to do here, I'll just play this. I mean, he is low on time for the position, given we're only, what, 19 moves in. He has used up a lot of time, especially compared to Hans. But, we are in the sort of deep into the middle game, and you could envisage that the end game isn't too far off. So I don't think it's critical, his time loss yet. I think it's not too far off being critical. Depends how much longer the end game goes on for, and how much longer the middle game goes on for, and how complicated the end game becomes. But I don't think he's in a critical enough time state to be to be just making that kind of decision. And if it was a time issue, I think he'd just play a simple move that doesn't risk anything. Just make it his opponent's move without losing anything. Get 30 seconds back and spend your opponent's time thinking. I think that's what I do, and I think that seems like a sensible sort of professional decision to make. So I don't think that decision was based off of time. If it wasn't based off of time, I don't know what it was based off of, frankly. I'll use my phone stand. That'll be much easier. I can watch your chat without holding it up all the time. In answer to your question, electric, yes, Etienne really is down almost an hour, which is why I was sort of discussing the time issue, really. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, some moves have happened, I believe. F6, Queen F4, B4, as predicted in the chat, in fact. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be knight B1, right? That's the only... Well, okay. You can't really go... I mean, knight A4 is obviously not possible, nor is B5 or D5. You've either got to play knight B1 or rook takes D8 and then knight D1. So I think knight B1 is the obvious. So let's just explore the not so obvious. So I think probably oh yeah, computer doesn't like that. I think probably after Queen A5, you just don't have anything to stop this attack. And it's not so much about losing the A pawn, it's about the fact that actually the queen's coming down to, well, probably checkmate you, and you can't escape because of this rook. And your pieces are just so all over the place that you can't fight it either. So, oh dear, excuse me. So I think it's got to be knight b1, in which case, not really sure why we'd need to swap off the rooks. I go by the general rule that I only swap off. I don't swap off for the sake of swapping off, right? I only swap off if I'm gaining something out of this transaction, and I don't gain anything out of that transaction. So there's not much point swapping off. I end up just losing any control I have over the d file if I do that. So I think knight b1's got to be the best move here. We'll see what's played. This is the live position. Yeah, you don't have that bishop a6 tactic because of knight takes. Oh, actually, yeah, sorry. So hang on, that's probably worth going over. Yeah, so very interestingly, actually, so f6, obviously before we said that after b4 and queen a5, we had bishop a6, which was a tactic. And interestingly, you have a similar idea. If this was the position now, you would have a similar idea if this pawn was on b4, because you could play bishop takes. If you queen takes, then queen takes knight, and if knight takes, then queen takes bishop check. But actually, even then, it's a bit hypothetical, because if the pawn was on b4, then at the end of that, you'd take on the knight anyway. So it doesn't really work. But yes, that bishop a6 idea is still hanging in the balance. But now that the queen is not attacking this bishop, that's definitely not on the cards now. So sorry, hang on. Let's go with this instead, which I think is the line that we're going to go for. I suspect that will be the line that we see on the board. This is the live board, though. This is, yeah, Malkovich. This is indeed after a Sicilian. This was a Sicilian Taimanov. where black played 2e6, so a quick e6. And then we had a steady development of pieces, swapped on c6, hence why the c pawn is on c6. That used to be the d pawn. And then we sort of had this situation where white started throwing some pawns at black on the king side. Black started throwing some pawns at white on the queen side. Some exchanges and some interesting tactics happened in the middle. And that's where we're at, really. We've got some advanced pawns on both sides. A lot of interesting tactics happening and happened in the middle. And seeing where we go next. I think the main problem also to sort of point out why I think possibly White's evaluation isn't stronger than it is right now is that sort of White's attack doesn't really go anywhere. There's nothing on the end of it. So you might disrupt, like there was before, because we thought he was going to go kingside. And originally, I said that he couldn't really go queenside, but eventually he slowly set it up and made it possible. You might just disrupt the kingside pawns. You might get a lot of space. It might be very good for you, but at the end of the day, there's nothing on the end of it to win you the game. Whereas if black succeeds with his attack, white's done for. So, swings and roundabouts, realistically, I think there's not too much in it. But if we had to pick a side, unfortunately, I think the computer was picking black for that. I think my personal evaluation is this is still harder to play for white, but I think I would still take white because ultimately he has a better pawn structure. I think he has more potential to do some damage to sort of this pawn minority over here. And also his pieces are starting to look like they might have some potential. If he can sort out this knight issue of being, trapped away over here, if he can get that back out or swap it off, then I think we could have a really nice position for some really nice activity for white going forward. Do we have any more questions from the chat whilst we wait a live move? Live move has happened. Knight b1 as we predicted. From the chat, just to read it out, I bet Etienne sees a perpetual in 10 moves and goes for it. For now, following the line with bishop a2, queen going in afterwards and finding a perpetual. It's certainly possible that a perpetual will arise. I think that is definitely possible. I don't think anything is forced at all, though, realistically. I think the most likely sort of route for that to arise is after bishop a2, if you go b3, and then black sacks the knight. So I think this is a possibility. And then, swap and king b2 and bishop e6. And this is very dynamic, very interesting position because the queen, even though it's like sort of controlling some important squares, it can't get back, right? It's going to have to come here, which is really where you want the rook to be going. So it's all a little, I don't know, uncomfortable, I would say, for white. E5 probably here, or rook d1, like rook d1. No need to mess up this nice little pawn structure here, but take back some control of the d file, potentially swap some pieces off, which is probably a good thing, considering we have the extra piece. And there is a danger that these pawns start advancing and trap our king gets in the way, and that's a problem. But with less pieces on the board, we're more likely to be able to stop it in its tracks, I think. So someone's asked if there was anything with knight b3 and then queen c5. I think the problem with queen c5 is that now when we play king b2, the knight does a very good job of protecting these squares. And so, you know, for example, this is not possible for very nice bishop takes a6 checkmate, right? So if you can't take there, then I'm threatening bishop takes a6 checkmate, which means that the next move I'm just going to take this bishop. Okay, yeah. Yeah, if you hadn't seen the b3 move, then that definitely. I mean, if we don't play b3, then definitely it's definitely a consideration for sure. That could be problematic. I think, though, I don't know. Could be interesting for sure. Yeah, okay, so I don't know, I'm just going to play like a null move, like an unimportant move. So actually b3 it says is the best move, but basically I just wanted to see if knight b3 is a threat. If you play knight b3 here, then I think I play, obviously, well, that's the only move I take. And then if you play queen c5, I might play either bishop c4 or knight c3, because I have this really nice idea. I can play queen f5 and force an exchange of queens. So all I have to do is just like temporarily block this. And after bishop b3, queen f5, queen takes. And then you have this really nice move again, bishop takes a6. Just this intermediate move, yeah. It's really nice. And then you end up with two pieces for the rook when he eventually takes the hen, and that's just very good for white. That's just winning endgame. So actually in this position, I would have said that a simple move like king b7 might save a whole lot of aggro, because certainly I think if I was playing Blitz, I'd play king b7 very quickly. So the reason is that, like, in all of these calculations that I keep going through, which is obviously what you do at the board, in all these calculations that you're going through, bishop a6 repeatedly comes up as a problem. So does queen f5. Yeah, and checking one way or another is a repeated problem. So just, even if you don't have a concrete reason why this is a problem yet, sometimes just getting your king out the way, putting it on a nice safe square, means that you don't have the issue to deal with later, and it also makes your opponent find a good move now when he's in a difficult position. So I just seen in the chat that someone said, but king b7, not b3. I think king b7 works in a lot of different positions. I agree. But we have some moves on the board. So bishop takes a2 did happen. b3 has happened as well. So things are heating up. Computer at roughly, sorry, that was BBC News giving me a notification. b3, things are heating up. Definitely, the computer gives a very slight edge to black, but I think it's fairly negligible. Even with perfect play, this is probably uneven, as they call it. Yeah, so it's not really better for one side or another, but you can't really say equal, because it's not, nothing about it is equal realistically. Equal would be a 3-pawn versus 3-pawn bishop and bishop versus bishop ending. That's equal. This is uneven. I wouldn't particularly sway to one side unless I had to, but equally I wouldn't say that they are level. Oh, I went king b7. Nice. Thank you for the shout out there. Yeah. Always nice when you predict these things. Yeah, I think, as I said before, I think that's just to get the heck out the way, doesn't want to be in the way there. And in all of those calculations, it was a repeated problem. So I think that's a very sensible move. The computer likes knight takes b3 and king b7 equally. And so, especially if you do this deep calculation and there's no real difference, you don't want to stay where you are. You want to just make life easier for yourself, surely. So I said in Blitz, you do it just really quickly, because you just don't want to make, unless there's like a concrete reason not to, that you have some sort of concrete line where you're just winning, or like extremely, definitely gaining an advantage. You want to just make life easier for yourself very quickly, so you don't have lots of complicated calculations and tricks to look out for when you're making these calculations that you need to make. You don't want to have all of that in the background to consider as well, because it's very easy to miss something. Instead, in standard play in classical chess, you can get away with it because you have the time to think about it. I mean, Etienne doesn't have much time to think about it, but at least you can get away with it more. But given that there is nothing in this position that immediately jumps out as winning or gaining a significant advantage, thinking b7 is an excellent choice by Etienne. I think they've done well asking me to commentate this game, purely because I can't truly be, I've got some bias because I'm on Hans Niemann's channel, but I've also got some bias because I very much like the Taimanov opening. So I think the biases weigh themselves out. I think I hope I'm giving you a fair account both sides. I will say I think that Hans has done a very good job in this position of, well, in the last few moves of this game, just stabilizing it a little, because there was a lot of complicated variations that could go very wrong for white. And when you're winning, winning's the wrong word. When you're much better and I think he definitely felt like he had an advantage there. I would have definitely taken white for a long time in that game. I think it's very easy to sort of go, oh, I'm winning. I was better. I need to keep pushing to be better, and it's really a hallmark, in my opinion, of players of this standard. Grandmasters and really super grandmasters, to really sort of be able to switch that mindset. He realized that he wasn't in this kind of preferable position anymore, and he found ways to make his life easier, to make sure he stabilized the position and didn't make it any worse for himself, which I think is very commendable. And in answer to, I will analyze knight d2 now. In answer to the first question I had, what do you think about Hans playing so quickly? I think a lot of this would have been preparation, so I think that's probably what it's down to. And that's often what happens when you get one player playing a lot slower than the other, is that the other is just, the player who's playing quicker has probably prepared a line and that's come out. And also if he's more familiar with these, I think for a lot of the move, like up until Hans started really taking his time, things were very easy for Hans to, well, I say very easy, easier in relative terms to play for white. But Bacrot, he had a very difficult position immediately, like very quickly. He had to spend a lot of time thinking. So, I think that probably explains the time difference. In answer to knight d2, got some interesting discussion going on in the chat here. Some people saying, well, knight d2, well, they haven't said it, but I assume the idea is to go to c4. But others saying, well, you should leave it there because it's a really good defensive piece for this, for these squares. I think I tend to agree with leaving it there, just because there's some very tricky stuff if you start moving that knight out of the way. So, for example, if you play knight d2, immediately you've got this as a problem, knight e6, and that's a destroyer of a move, because after queen f5, it's the only place you can go unless you sort of go back this way, and queen d4, this mate is just unbelievably difficult to stop. And well, in fact, you need to give up a lot of pieces to sort of to get by, which is just not good. None of this. I don't need to analyze any further. This is horrible. Yeah, and wow, indeed, it's funny how these things can just creep up on you. This is why this knight is really important on this square, and also why it's important to keep this d file in control. This temporary loss of the d file can lead to catastrophic tactics coming your way. So it's a nice idea to try and get the knight here, but I think even though it only takes 2 moves, I still think it's too slow. Yeah, king b2. I mean, in answer to the question, is this part of theory? It's definitely not part of theory anymore. I don't know where we variated from theory. If this was theory, they definitely wouldn't be taking so long, for starters. But also, I think a lot of this stuff. I mean, for example, the computer. If it was theory, the computer wouldn't have disagreed with a lot of the lines. I am not too familiar with this line itself, so I don't know exactly where we varied from theory. I'm going to guess about, I don't know, move off the top of my head, move 11 or 12. Let's go and check back. Yeah, I think this is probably maybe a few more. I mean, Queen F2 is more of a theme than a theory, so I think almost, in fairness, and despite the fact, if I may say so myself, I think I was almost spot on with saying that the theory sort of starts to vary here a little bit. Queen F2, at least hard mainline theory, varies, and definitely after Bishop E4, Bishop C5. This is obviously a line, but I don't think it's like any sort of main theory that either of these guys knew about, especially with the time they've been taking after Queen A3. Maybe something like 14, 15, 16 started to be much more of a variation. So yeah, you're very welcome, Markovic. I hope that helped. Right, I've got some more suggestions of some lines. We already have a move on the board, which I'll go over in a second. Well, I'll just point out now, is E5. So we'll come back to that in a second. Miles, you've suggested Bishop C4 to stop knight E6 and then knight D2. I like the idea of stopping knight E6. The problem is the point of knight D2 was to go to C4. So difficult when your bishop is in the way. And maybe I can play Queen A5 and I don't know. It's interesting though, because maybe King B2 and Rook A1 would be beneficial there. But if that's the case, I'm sure there's something. There's got to be something. But it's a really good point. I mean, what? Okay, so actually, the computer says the Bishop C4 is the best move. So really, well done, Miles. That's a really great move, and one that I hadn't really considered. So it says that Black should just play Bishop takes B1, King takes, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And now we're pretty level, and I think on the most part, both sides are a little out of the woods. So yeah, spot on, Miles. I think actually, although you've now said that you really like the E5 move, I think the Bishop C4 move was possibly the best move on the board. So yeah, well done. Position is very tough. You're right. E5. What do we think? The computer stopped. I don't know why. So I don't know if the evaluation's still working. Looks like we're freeballing it now. E5 is interesting. Oh, now it's kicked in. It doesn't like it. I was just thinking sacrificing somewhere. Sacrificing with something on B3. I'm just trying to work out which one to sacrifice with. I don't really know. I imagine probably both are fairly valid. But if you take with the bishop, yeah, I would prefer to take the knight because if you take the bishop, I think what happens is here you don't actually have very much to do. It feels good, but okay, like maybe you have to go knight c5 or knight d4 or something. But I mean, you're not really threatening very much. And I'm just going to carry on with what I was doing and taking a bunch of pawns. So yeah. So I don't like bishop takes. Let's have a look at knight takes. Okay, computer is not that big a fan either. But okay, it's not suggesting anything else. So I think knight takes b3 would be potentially quite good. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Miles. Bishop c4 stopped the sacks, and I think that's why the computer doesn't like e5 and very much likes bishop c4. Just stabilizes everything. So yeah, absolutely hats off to you. I think that's certainly a move of the game in terms of the comment section here. Well done. Very well done. C takes, bishop takes. Obviously, I don't think he wants to play queen c5 because then I get to play king b2 and then you're not winning the pawn back. And then I could probably end up playing bishop c4 again anyway, just to cover myself. So I think he's got to take back pretty quickly. Computer says king b2 is the best thing and just give up the exchange. And that doesn't feel like a good ending to play. That feels like a miserable ending to play. Being an exchange down. Oh no, not an exchange down. Sorry. But all those pawns look very menacing on the queen side. I don't know if that's an ending I'd want to play. It also says black is better, which doesn't give me much confidence. Interesting. Sorry, guys, I was just thinking. It just so happens. That's what we have to do in chess. Think sometimes. I think I really don't want to play king b2. Okay, let's look at the other options. So if I play like rook d2, or I think if I take, that could be a problem because then he just takes back and I can't play rook d1 to challenge him again on the d file. I've got to say fair play to Etienne here with that sack that takes some guts. And but I'm also sure that Hans was considering this. So oh dear, oh dearie me, play knight e6, which computer says is a very bad move. Wowee, why? Sorry, I thought he'd already. I've done that again, or I've assumed that he's played a different move. Except this time I assumed he played the best move, which was to take on b3. So I revoke my hats off to Etienne because he did not take on b3, and I have no idea why. It's just definitely the best move. Okay, knight e6. Wow. I guess the point is if I go queen f5, you can play knight d4. That's pretty uncomfortable. But I have queen c4, queen e4. Computers even saying bishop takes a6 is not bad, which is a bizarre statement, but a clever one. I quite like that, actually, just to simplify. I mean, I don't think it's the best move. I've got to say something like queen c4's. Queen c4's probably got to be the best move, right? But I really like bishop takes a6. Queen e4. So yeah, so I'd say our three candidate moves are queen c4, queen e4, and bishop takes a6. Queen e4, knight c4, queen f4 draw. I don't think he's going to go back. I think he's going to go to c4. Because if you go back to f4, you give him the option again of going takes on b3. I get why he hasn't done it to an extent that he feels like it's not concrete enough, I think. It isn't like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then I win. But I feel like at that level, having an end game such as this, where you're sort of having this, I feel like at this level, maybe he didn't feel too comfortable with it, but I feel like at this level, this is enough probably to convert. It's not going to be easy, but I feel like this is enough to convert at this level. The strength of these players, this feels convertible. So yeah, I mean, someone said he trusted Hans. I mean, that's a possibility. I feel like, and when you don't have much time, maybe you consider that. But I certainly know from my experience that I don't trust my opponent, however good they are. Even having played Super Grandmasters, I wouldn't go, oh well, that's no good because they wouldn't have let me play that. Because if you go off that logic, well, you're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to get a result against them. So I don't like that way of thinking too much, to be honest. Some funny comments on the chat. Okay, so Queen C4 has been played. And White is definitely well. This is definitely preferable to knight takes b3 for White. It's got to be. Whilst we sorry, I'm just reading your chat. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the point, right? That this wasn't that much of a complicated calculation. This wasn't like, 10 different variants, 10 moves down the line for each one. This was maybe 5 moves max. This was I feel like anyone above 20, well, even 2000 maybe could calculate this on the board to get to at least winning, to get to enough of a position where you'd be comfortable playing. But then when you add in the fact that obviously as a 2700, basically as Super Grandmaster, you're comfortable in end games. Basically, you're comfortable in converting these kind of positions, which should be, you would assume that they are. I feel this is just surprising to me. I just don't understand why he didn't do it, and I don't think he would just trust his opponent. So we have knight d4 on the board, which must have been the plan all along. I don't really know what he's doing, though. I don't know what he's trying to achieve here. I mean, can I just ignore him and play e takes f6? Just whatever. Carry on, Étienne. Yeah, I really like Hans' position now. I think I see this swinging the wrong way for Étienne and very much the right way for our host, Hans Niemann, which is excellent news. Not for the Sicilian time enough, but definitely for Hans. Interesting. Okay. Can you play queen takes a6 and then move the knight? Yeah, so I mean, this was the idea before, actually, where we were after knight e6. The idea was, can we play bishop takes a6. If king takes, then we're going to play queen c4 and take on e6. If queen takes, then I'm going to play queen takes b4, and then when the king moves, I don't know, there, I take, and you're going to take here, and then I end up with 2 pawns for the piece, and the piece is not very good piece, and I have a lot of activity and whatever. Or I can even, I don't know if I can play there. Computer doesn't like it, but I do. It's only marginal anyway. Whoops. So, I think I'd probably just play knight c3 or something. And then king b2, and I like white's chances. I like white's chances in this. You've got, as long as you manage to keep this pawn, these are safe. These are good. He's probably gonna do that, so that you have one less pawn. But you potentially have open files onto his king now as well. You've got a really nice outpost on e4, potentially with some potential to go into d6. So there's a lot of possibilities here. So that was the option earlier, and I really quite liked that, and I almost to an extent preferred it to queen c4, but only because I quite like the simplicity of the position that we get to, not necessarily because it's that much better, I don't know if it's better at all, really. I think the computer sort of says it's roughly the same. But I would completely understand why Hans here is trying to go for something a little better and play out these calculations a little longer, especially given that Étienne doesn't have very much time, to be calculating all of this. But in answer to your question, can he play queen takes a6 in this position? Apparently no. And I guess that makes sense because now you don't have that same guarantee of winning that piece back. So for example, you got this to contend with. Now this is defended. And it's just going to take, you'll probably win it eventually, but it's going to take you longer. It's going to be difficult. So I think more importantly, even if it was possible, it's not necessary. We've got a nice position. There's no need to start throwing it. Like, I feel like that would be throwing it away, just trying to simplify the position unnecessarily. So on the board, we have e takes f6, g takes f6, and queen f7. That is interesting. So the evaluation bar very clearly saying that that white is better now. Well, at least it's certainly favoring white. Just trying to think of some options. Queen c7 doesn't make very much sense. Well, it makes no sense, in fact, because you can play bishop takes a6, of course. And that would probably be pretty good for white. So he's probably going to move his king. He got 3 places, so A, B, or C8. I'm not entirely sure it makes a massive difference which. However, I would say that C8 is probably the worst one, just because, we moved it off of C8 for a reason, right? To get out of all of these checks. So it'd be pretty pointless to put it back. Whereas if we go to B8 or to A8, we still sort of maintain the same concept. So I think I just like the concept of keeping it on a dark square. Oh, and that is in fact what he's played. It's very nice when I do these predictions and I get them right. Okay, so obviously he's got to move the bishop now. D3 or C4 seems very sensible. I don't want to. I don't see the need to swap. I could let him take it and, like play rook h2 or rook d2 and let him take it. But as I said before, I want some value out of these swaps, and that doesn't feel valuable to me. So I think bishop c4 because, you can't, taking doesn't really have very much value in it anyway, because you can just go queen takes f6. and you can't move his queen out the way because you're hunting down d8 there. But just in general, I just like this position for white, really. It's just good. You're not quite a pawn up because at the end of the day, he has this a pawn, but this a pawn is frankly rubbish. And secondly, he's at risk of losing his bishop once you move your knight out the way. So, and your queen's very active. Your bishop is very keeping this all very tight and neat. Your rooks are active and a good. Well, the rooks are about level, but I would take my queen over his, my bishop over his, maybe his knight over mine. But the knight's doing a very important defensive job, so not too important. And actually, this knight, whilst it looks good, it's not actually doing anything there. It's just in the center of the board. It doesn't actually achieve anything. So I could just play some sensible stuff and just be better. I think this is just a better position for white. So I got something from Mikegawa. King A8 kept the balance. Is that so? Well, I'm not sure how much I trust the stockfish anyway, because that's disagreeing with that. Oh, sorry. That's disagreeing with that statement that you just made, but I'm if you've got another engine up, then I'll believe that probably more. So you're saying a deep point about avoiding queen e5 check after king takes f6. Sorry, queen takes f6 and rook h f8. But I'm a little confused because I assume you mean after something like this. Even in this position, though, well, okay, I mean that was bad because the rook takes d8, but yeah, I mean rook hf8 is never really a problem because of this. If you play knight takes f3, and also knight takes f3 covers the e5 square. But if you're not going to do that, then I don't know what else. I feel like you'd stop queen takes f6. So, okay, thank you for letting me know if it's Lee Chester's stockfish. But would you mind providing like the line for that? Because I don't really understand how that would ever work, to be quite honest. But anyway, whilst you're doing that, if you're going to do that, no worries if not. But if you're going to do that, we'll get back to the game. And we have bishop c4 on the board, as predicted. So that's good. Now Etienne is starting to get a little tight time-wise. I will just, as I promised, I will tell you the second part of that Spassky story. So 2008 was when I first met him. 2009, I'm now 9 years old. He comes back to the same competition. And funny for Kunis. Yeah, so it comes back to the same competition, and he's sitting in the bar. This time he hasn't really been announced yet. No one sort of has noticed too much that he's there. It's his first night there, and I'm in the sort of the playing area of the bar. I'm only 9, bear in mind, at the time, and I'm with my parents and some other chess players, and we spot him. And now I'm 9 years old. I'm sort of going, oh, well, I sort of know who this person is a little more. Like I have more of a sort of social awareness. I knew who he was before, but just I had more of social anxiety around it. Just naturally, that happens as you get older. I wasn't so, I was slightly less fearless. Anyway, and my parents again said, well, just go up to him, go and say hello. I said, well, all right then. Fine. So I went over and I said hello, and I said, I'm really sorry to bother you, Mr. Spassky, again, but do you happen to remember me? And he again looked. Well, he gave me one look and went, of course, Stephen, you remember my name. Of course, Stephen, come, sit down. And he was playing an Argentinian super grandmaster, like he was analyzing a game with him. And for the life of me, which is very frustrating, I can't remember his name. I'll have to look that up for when I tell this story in future. But he sat me down and he said, so Stephen, what do you think of this position? Now I'm 9 years old and I'm like, I don't know, something like 15, 1600. And I'm and I'm being asked this, with one of the greatest players ever to walk the earth, playing, analyzing with a super grandmaster. He's asking little 9-year-old me what I think of this position. And I sort of look at it and I think for a while and I say, well, I'm really sorry to say, Mr. Spassky, but I think you're losing. And he looked at me and went, quite right, and resigned. And we sat and we talked and we played for a little bit. And then the Argentinian grandmaster very courteously, let me interrupt this conversation he was having. And he said, he shook my hand, said it was really nice to meet you. And then Spassky got up and I thought he was going to leave. And instead he goes around the other side and he proceeded to teach me, give me a lesson for like an hour and a half. And just started with like, so what openings do you play? And we just sat and had a chat. It didn't feel like a lesson. Like he made it feel so comfortable. We just sat and talked for like an hour and a half. It was so kind of him. And he, yeah, so we had that conversation and the papers, it got to the press that was happening and that they started coming around taking pictures and whatever. And the nicest thing, which I think really showed his character, it was an absolutely wonderful experience, Pakunas. Yeah. The nicest thing that I think really shows his character was that a few days later, I bumped into him a couple of times. A few days later, I was just coming out of I just finished my round. I was just coming to like the reception area of the hotel, and I see him walking to his like sort of coach that he's getting on. And he's got a group of people with him, like a full entourage, waiting for him to get on the bus. And he sees me as he's walking out, and they're clearly in a rush. And they're shouting at him to come on. He said, "Wait, I have to go and say goodbye to my friend." And he turns around, he comes back in, and he kneels down because I'm only tiny, and shakes my hand. And he says, "It was so nice to see you again, Stephen. I really hope to see you again soon." A good friend of mine who really did a lot for my chess and really taught me so much. He was at that tournament and he was like, "You don't realize what you've just experienced. Like this was just, as you say, Mikhail Spassky is pure class. It was really, really beautiful moment and really lovely, really wonderful guy." So yeah, so that's the story of how I became friends with Spassky. His words, not mine. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see him because, well, he had a stroke and then no one was quite sure what was happening with him. So I would really like to get back in touch with him again. But unfortunately, hasn't been so far. But hopefully I'll be able to speak to him again. And well, yes, I guess he did bow to me. I never thought of it like that. It is a very, yeah, it was very, looking back at it, it was very cute. In the moment, it was just like, wow, this is so nice. Like my friend stopped to say goodbye, but looking back at the enormity of like who he is as a character and everything, really, really incredible. And one thing I think you'll find, next commentary, Watley Spassky, that would be a dream. That would be a dream. I'd love to commentate with him. And to play with him and speak to him. But actually, something you'll all find quite funny is because what made me think of it was that we mentioned Fischer earlier. When we were going through what openings he was playing, I was only 9, right? And he asked what openings I play, and I was going through some of them. And I sort of, I played E4, E5, and I said, I came up with this opening. I thought I'd invented this. I was like, I've come up with this opening. Yeah, thank you for the update. I shall update the board and then I shall go through and analyze this in a second. And he says, please show me this opening that you've invented. And I was like, okay, great. So I showed him and it was E4, E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. So Ruy Lopez, a6, bishop takes c6, and knight takes e5. And I was like, I've invented this. And obviously, not knowing that this was a famous game from this Fischer-Spassky match, he sort of looked at it, smiled. He didn't say a word. Pure class. He didn't say a word. He looked at it, smiled, and went, "It's a very good opening." And I just thought that was a. I couldn't believe it when I looked back at the games like a year later or whatever that he played. I was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I did that." He just let me have it. Anyway, okay, let's go back and have a look very quickly. Sorry, I've been ranting on and didn't realize that the position had changed. So back to the hard graft, as it were. King b8, bishop c4, rook h f8, attacking the queen. Computer doesn't like it. I think it makes perfect sense, but I guess he doesn't want to give up the h. The computer doesn't want to give up the h pawn. He wants to play something like queen c5 instead. It really doesn't like bishop takes b1, but again, these feel like very natural moves, so it just shows you what can happen in this kind of situation. Again, it wants to play queen c5, so I think that makes sense, obviously, to try and set up a tactic here with the queen and the king on the same file. But after king b2, bishop takes, king takes, I don't know. It feels very similar to me, so I don't know why it really doesn't like this. So obviously king takes b1. Queen e4. I mean, it says white is completely winning here. I get actually on second thoughts, I guess it's just because you can't really stop this h pawn. I guess that's the problem. And all of a sudden, Hans is walking all over Étienne. All of a sudden, he is, yeah, in a brilliant position. Thank you for for those appreciating my story. Sorry that I missed some important moves. I appreciate your appreciation. So yeah, thanks. So let's have a look at how did this happen. I mean, here we are. Okay, it's a bit better for white, and I said I would probably take this position. Plus 0.5. I would definitely take it for white, but it's not winning. And it looks like it's this move that immediately changes it. That you just shouldn't be giving up that h pawn. And I reckon probably that in the time scramble that in the time pressure that he's feeling, he probably feels like probably underestimated the value of that h pawn. Probably thought, and it's a tendency sometimes, right? You just go, oh, well, it's a h pawn, it doesn't matter so much, especially when you're in time pressure. It's like a sacrifice you're willing to make without putting too much pressure on it. But in a position like this, it looks like that's really sort of crucial, that this is just going to become a killer. Really doesn't like bishop takes b1. I really don't understand why. I assume because it just simplifies. Well, actually, yeah, I do understand why, I guess. It simplifies the position when actually we want to be making it more complicated to stop this progression of the h pawn. Yeah, but it also, you're quite right, it also puts the queen on. Not only does it take the pawn, it's also just a very good square for the queen, because this is a very important diagonal and it's quite out the way of problems, and it has a lot of squares to retreat back to if it needs to. Even d3 if it had to. I mean, not yet, but once this bishop goes, then even d3. So yeah, so it doesn't. I mean, an interesting little nugget for you that a GM once told me, that really the difference between like a 2300 and 2500, or 2500 and 2700, so those 200-point differences, you'll find that they can calculate a lot of the same stuff. They have a lot of the same clever opening prep. You know, they know a lot of the same endgame stuff. What really makes the difference is they're willing to just hold out that bit longer. So where I, for example, earlier wanted to play bishop takes a6, I did point out also that maybe in a classical game, you don't want to do that, because you want to keep the tension longer. So that's the aim. You want to You want to keep the tension longer. And I think that's exactly what Hans has done throughout this game. He hasn't given up that tension. And here, Etienne, unfortunately for him, fortunately for Hans, he has given it up by playing Rook F8 and then by taking the knight rather than trying to build that pressure on the queen side. And now I think it's more or less all over, really. I'll be very impressed if Etienne manages to make any compensation or any sort of comeback from this. This is dire situation for him, definitely. So I've got some very a selection of interesting questions here. Okay, I'll start from the first one. What was the move instead of Rook F8? I think the move instead of Rook F8 is Queen C5 to build that pressure to make these kind of threats on B3, etc. Definitely, I think that's something. That's something there. And it's definitely better than Rook F8. And I think almost anything other than Rook F8, just because you don't want to give up that H pawn. I mean, maybe even H5 at some point, so that if he does get a H pawn, it's doubled, and you've got some protection there. But I think giving up this H pawn is definitely the big mistake here. Thank you. I will. I'm good. But thank you very much. Thank you. Next question. What could something from Sturban? I think the Fischer Bishop could get trapped. I mean, it could, but I think the point is that you are going to take it eventually. But realistically, White is going to have to play Knight D2 to get away with this, and that's really difficult to do in this kind of position. Because as soon as you play Knight D2, you've got Knight E2 and C3, for example, and look how the valuation bar changes. You've got this, right? And if you play here, well, I think the move is Queen C3, sorry. And then you've got this, and that's really problematic. So, you're going to start having problems if you start trying to take that bishop. So I think that's the point that it feels like you need to get rid of it. That's the automatic reaction that this is a problem, you need to get rid of it. But actually, you need to keep the tension. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. I was trying to follow the chat at the same time. Not very good at multitasking, it seems. Apologies, guys. Okay, so this is where we saw it last. Knight takes, bishop takes, makes sense. He's simplifying, right? Which I guess makes sense. He's low on time as well. Takes. He wants to swap queens naturally. If he can swap queens, then he might have some hope of trying to salvage a draw from this. But he's definitely playing for a draw here. Queen d4, clever move. Obviously, that he's like, okay, you can take it if you want, but I'm going to play Queen d6 if you do. So Rook g8 to stop that. G6, again, very clever, because if he takes, then you're going to have Queen d8, or Queen h8, or Queen f4, quite literally anything. And then when the king moves, you can play here and then take the rook. Or in fact, I mean, if you were to go to King C7, then you've even got Queen D8 checkmate. But anyway, so he doesn't want to take that. So instead, Black's play Queen B7, which is sensible, cover the second or seventh rank. Rook F1 is very precise. Rook F1 is a very good move. Again, stopping this threat. I think this is a really nice way that Hans is playing here, in that it would be very natural for a lot of players for me included, to try and just defend this this pawn. But no, and pile everything on. But instead, he's just kept everything really, really tight and just keep up the threats. And it looks like we have a winner. Hans has won the match. Étienne Bacrot has resigned after putting up a very valiant fight. But I think my analysis, at least, is that it all went wrong with Rook F8. It's already not great, but that was a real turning point. And ultimately, the time and the pressure got the better of him a little, and Hans just did a better job at keeping up that pressure. So very big congratulations to Hans. And what a performance so far. What's that? I think 3.5 out of 4 is just incredible performance, taking down Bacrot, Giri, and Vatukov in a matter of a couple of days. Just spectacular. Really impressive performance. Just to answer some of the chat here, some that I missed from before. Sorry, just scrolling back up. In answer to your question, Nemes, I am not a personal friend of Hans. I have a personal mutual friend of Hans, which is why I'm here. I'm very happy to be. Very much enjoying this, and thank you all for being here to witness this great game. And I'm really pleased that I got to commentate it for you. And really enjoyed the opportunity. So thank you to his team, and thank you guys, without whom it wouldn't be possible. In answer to another question that I have on here from Barbie, what is the difference between 2,000 2,200 FIDE? I'm trying to make the jump. I mean, I was using this as a generalization between 200 points between players, that basically if you have sort of the ability to sort of ride out the strain in a position, sort of like ride out the pressure in a position, keep that tension just that bit longer, you find that makes a stronger player. Not simplifying too soon and like settling for less kind of thing has a really big impact. So that's one thing that I'd say. Another thing that I'd say is that can have a big impact is just a psychological trick, which is simply that, like, you make sure that if the position changes, the evaluation of the position changes, you make sure that you reset your head and your psychology to focus on that reset change. In answer to the most recent question, by the way, I hope that helps, Nemes, with your question. I think it was Nemes that asked. Anyway, the most recent question, what is Hans's playing style? I think he's, in all honesty, I haven't extensively analyzed his games, but from what I do know about his games, and certainly from this one, is he doesn't shy away from tactical and aggressive chess. I would sort of liken him to I would almost liken him to a Bobby Fischer in terms of style. Well, that would be my sort of semi-uneducated opinion. He's not like a Mikhail Tal where tactics rules the day, and he's not like a Botvinnik where positional rules the day, but he has obviously incredible strength in both. But in particular, I think favors a more tactical, aggressive match, which is why I think I'd probably liken him to Fischer a little with that, which I'm sure he'd be happy with as a comparison. Yeah, also Nepo a little bit like Nepomniachtchi. Nepomniachtchi. He plays very quickly, which is something that I have never been able to do, or never wanted to do, really. So I'm gonna have to ask him about that. But I think that generally comes from a lot of strong preparation and intuitive play, like having being really comfortable in the positions that he's playing in allows him to play quickly, I'm sure. And you're very welcome. I hope that helped. Yeah, I'm just going through to see if there are any more questions. I do not play faster. I play much slower. I would be the Étienne in this match. I'd be taking my time. But I would like to think that when it came down to it, I would have probably gone for the knight takes b3. I am definitely one for the for the for the aggressive sacrifice at random. Even sometimes, even I'm one for the underdog. So I think I would have probably gone it's always easier to say right when you're just watching on, but I think it would have been I would have probably gone with the knight takes b3. That's what I like to think, at least. Yeah, so 4.5 to 1.5 at the moment between the two, which is great for Hans. Very interesting game. Is there anything that anyone watching? You're very welcome, M316. You're very welcome for the commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. First time commentating on Hans's channel, so I hope you really enjoyed it, and I didn't bore you at all with my story time. And I hope also that the calculations were kept sufficiently up to speed for you guys. If there's any questions, anything in particular that anyone wants to sort of go over, maybe we could have a quick autopsy of the game. Let's just scroll. That'll be easier, won't it? So let's have a quick rerun of the game just to go over what's been happening, what happened, when, how, and why, and where maybe the missed opportunities were for both players, and ultimately what was the difference between them. I think we might have identified it, but we could probably have a quick skim through again and have a look. Thank you very much, guys, for all your really kind comments. I really appreciate it. I can't really call myself a streamer because I don't have a stream. I've done some commentary before. I do really like commentating. I will link my socials. Yeah, please, guys, get in touch. I am technically, I believe, on Twitch. I haven't quite worked out how it all works yet. But I am on Twitch. I'll just give a hi, and then that will immediately show you where my Twitch is. But my socials are as follows. I thank you for the question, but probably one for the team rather than me. If Hans will be joining us for an interview, if he'll want to be going over the game at all for the chat, he won't be. Okay, no, that's fine. I imagine not, given the the tournament that he's in. I mean, personally, when I'm in a tournament, I don't want to dissect it live if possible. I want to dissect it in private. Which is what I'm here for, right? So we will dissect it in a moment. And I'm just linking my socials now. And Twitter is @WhatMoney_Stephen. And yeah, please guys, get in touch. Pop me a message on there if you'd like to follow my journey. I'm also a fencer, so you'll see some fencing content as well on there. But yeah, thank you very much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. In answer to your question, will I be commentating on the match further? So I'm just quickly going to go over, I mean, nothing massively in depth, but if people would like to, I'll happily go through I'll happily go through sort of a quick dissection of the match, review what we went over, especially for anyone who maybe came in halfway through. So I'll review that, and then we'll go from there. But in terms of future matches, yes, it hasn't been exactly calculated by myself. That's on me. I haven't worked out exactly which ones I'll be able to commentate, but I'll be posting it on my socials, so you'll see it on there. And also just I will be commentating on future matches this week if they liked me. We'll see if I got the gig. In answer to your question, foil, saber, or epee, saber all the way. As you probably could tell from my temperament in that I always wanted to do the sacking and the aggressive play. Saber for me, the most aggressive weapon in fencing, and the fastest and the most tactical, I would say. At least the quickest tactics. Okay, back to the chess. So we had, for anyone, hopefully this will be interesting even if you were here for the whole match, but especially if you weren't. We started with e4, c5, knight, f3, e6, and we went over a quick sort of some other options, like you can have positions like this as well. At the beginning, you can have all sorts of different variations. But Étienne Bacrot, he went with e6 here on move 2, which does lead into some anti-Sicilians, but that's clearly not Hans's style. He went with d4. Thank you, Forno, and thank you, Wizzy. See you next time. Thank you very much. I'm going to keep going for anyone still listening. So not Hans's style. He went for the open Sicilian here. Knight c6. Also possible there is queen c7, but I think knight c6 makes sense. It does leave you open to knight b5, but again, this sort of like sideline Sicilian Taimanov is not what Hans was going for, and instead he's kept with some pretty mainline stuff. Bishop e3, also 6, bishop e3, also pretty mainline. Again, we went over a line that looked a bit like this, and you can get into this complicated stuff. Where white is much better, but actually if black plays the best line in that line, black is better, as you can see from the evaluation bar. So Hans did not go for this. He went for the mainline stuff. You're welcome, Walter. You're welcome for the recap. Enjoy. A6, pretty standard. Queen d2, also mainline stuff. And here I was just saying that I think White had the option to go different ways with his pawn movements. Okay, so basically he could go to f3 and g4, or in fact he could go to f4 and g3, or not even move the g3 pawn, and that would lead to sort of an English or Yugoslavian type attack, or a sort of Grand Prix type setup. So he had that option, and here though he castled just to give him a little more time to see where black was placing his pieces, to see which way to go. So bishop e7, again, quite similarly, a very easy move for black to play to keep the tension without committing. I personally, actually something that I didn't go over the first time, I personally very much like the bishop b4 lines, because I feel like with the d5 stuff, it's a lot more active. And b5, and the idea is that if they play a3 and kick you back, then you can I mean, not in that position exactly, because you're threatening here, so let's defend that first, right? Let's defend that first, and then when you play, like, I don't know, b5 or something, or castles even, yeah, probably castles in case things open up. The idea then is if they were to play a3, then you drop back, and now when you play b5, b4, you break open this this file, and it gives you a weakness to attack, right? Whereas before, when the pawn's back here, it takes you a lot more moves to get a rise out of white, basically. Whereas this prompts a rise, but like a jab in boxing, right? You're just like jabbing at them, waiting for them to give you a weakness and react, and that's what that A3 move would be. So more commonly, moves like G4, and then you get this really aggressive stuff, right? You play maybe D6 that you can drop your knight back, for example, or you go straight for D5, or you go for B5. You know, all of these things very possible. And then you can get similarly to the game. You can after G5, you can get the knight H5 lines and G6 and etc. That's possible, or you can go D6 and knight D7. That's also possible. So Etienne went for a little more of a passive Taimanov, which is obviously perfectly reasonable. Hans went with this Yugoslavian attack setup with the F3, preparing to launch his pawns up the board at the black king, should he castle kingside. B5, naturally, black's going to counter. And now white took the opportunity to take here so that, and realistically, it's so that because if queen takes, we'll get into that in a second, but if the pawn takes, which is what happened, you know, you're making it much more difficult for black to go queenside. You're taking out the tension from D5, the possibility of D5, and you're slowing the momentum. You're closing the C file, and you're just slowing the momentum of black's attack. So it's a really good move here. Knight takes C6. The computer sort of reduces the evaluation slightly, but I would ignore that, especially at this early stage of the opening. So knight takes C6, D takes C6, now G4, going along with the original plan. And E5, I really liked this move. I thought it was quite clever, to give black this E6 square for the bishop, which is and a very important diagonal, to slow the momentum of white's attack and to control some important squares in the center and gain a little bit of space. And actually, for a lot of the game, that bishop became an integral part of the game. And so did, you know, this move led to a lot of the positional stuff that was going on and a lot of the tactical stuff. So I felt like E5 was a really pivotal move there, that if he hadn't played that and he'd castled, for example, this would have been a very different game, probably worse for black than it was. So I very much liked the E5 move. H4 makes sense. Why not? Keep pushing. Now bishop comes to E6. Again, all very sensible stuff. I feel like Etienne must have not been too prepared for this line, given the fact that he's already used like half an hour of his time to get 12 moves in. You know, sometimes that's very doable, especially if there's options, but it just implies to me that this wasn't like hardcore prepared for this line by Etienne, but potentially, given how quickly Hans is playing, it could either be that he felt really confident in his preparation, or in his intuition, that he just felt really comfortable in this position because all of the lines that he'd been looking at in preparation maybe were similar to this. Okay, so bishop e6, queen f2, bishop e4. You see now, I mean, this is something else that he's ended up playing that anyway. So I feel like he would have been better off starting out by playing that. But hey-ho. Now, Hans plays a move that the computer doesn't really like very much. The computer wants to play bishop h3 and say sort of, well, I don't really care if you take here and take here. I don't mind, okay, because I'm just going to come and attack you. And I really don't mind. I'm going to get this lovely diagonal, etc. But actually, Hans took a different approach, which is the computer might not like, but I kind of did. I think I'd have still preferred bishop h3, but I did really like the value behind his idea, which was to play bishop c5 and ultimately say that, okay, if you take my knight, then I'm going to take control of this diagonal, and between this file and this diagonal, you can't castle, which was a clever idea. And I think the reason the computer doesn't like it is because I think it's basically saying that if you take it and take back, and then play knight d7 and queen e3, you're going to have to go queen e3 because like queen a3 leads to queen b6, which was kind of similar to what happened, except possibly with not so much play for white, not so much volatile play, but it is very similar to the line we ended up getting. So in fact, it might even be exactly the line we got. Oh, it is exactly the line we got. Okay. Sorry, excuse me for making that mistake. Okay, so yeah, so this is what happened. I think the point was that after takes, the computer wanted to play queen e3 and not get into what we ended up getting into, because the computers didn't like, and in fairness, I didn't too much like the middle of the game for Hans. So I think maybe this could have been more positionally correct, but I completely understand, obviously, Hans's idea that he needed to keep this alive, and this is a tactical game after all. So I think probably he ended up going with the right one for the game, the right option for the game. Sometimes it's also about playing the situation and the opponent just as much as it is about playing the actual position, like the psychological situation. I mean, not just the position on the board. So queen a3, queen b6 happened. Queen went back to d6. It kind of had to, because otherwise you were threatening b4. So queen goes back to d6. Castles queenside was a big move, really, because this whole time we've been saying, well, it's not really possible for black to castle queenside. It's not really possible for him to castle kingside because he's walking into an attack and staying in the middle while the center is opening as well. So if we go back to sort of like around about maybe here when we said this, I think this is really quite clever plan of Etienne's, that maybe he had right from this point when he played e5, of going bishop e6, like knight d7 and castling, and saying, okay, you can move your pawns as much as you like. I'm going to keep my king safe here, have a nice long file here that I can contend with, and then when I'm ready, push my pawns and my pieces, put my pieces in the right places to start building an attack, and you haven't got anything because my king isn't on that side of the board. So I think that was really clever from Hans's opponent, from Etienne. That's not to say that h4 or the following moves, queen f2, they were excellent responses. Possibly the best in the position, really. And responded very well here. But I think possibly to get around that, my analysis potentially would be to force something that he wasn't comfortable with. Maybe instead of queen f2 is to sort of maybe play bishop h3 and g5 to really like get in there and force something, or after queen f2 just again ignore bishop h3, just do something on the king side that makes black uncomfortable, so that he can't just sort of go around doing what he wants, basically. Now, of course, this was exactly making him uncomfortable. However, it did allow him to stick with this plan to play knight d7 and castle queenside. I think queen d7 is a possibility. Queen d6, sorry, is a possibility here that we didn't really consider, because after takes and rook c8, it's just slightly better, in my opinion, for white. Computer thinks black's better though, and in fairness, upon reflection, that trick, that psychological trick that I said is really easy to fall into. You feel like you should be better, so you're going to carry on feeling better. At the end of the day, whilst I might take white initially, these could turn out to be a real weakness. These can create a lot of holes. You've already got a hole on f4 for the knight to find a way into. Moves like h5 could cause you problems, whereas white doesn't really have anything to attack anymore. And I think that was the problem in general for Hans in the middle of the game, is that it felt like he didn't really have stuff to attack anymore. So, castle queenside, excellent move. And now what does white attack? Black has no sort of tangible weakness to target. So he sort of played what I think was a pretty sensible move. Again, computer didn't like it. But bishop e2. Personally, I actually think I would have preferred. I mean, he spent 10 minutes thinking about it, which was a significant chunk of the time he spent. But I would say that rook h2 was slightly preferable for me to swing the rook over and sort of build that battery. And at the end of the day, the rook was sort of not very helpful most of the game. Having said that, by the end of the game, it became integral because it meant that, well, it was one of the main reasons that he could win the game. So what do I know? Maybe that was the plan all along. I don't think so, but hey, who knows? So bishop e2. I mean, maybe he just didn't want to make that kind of commitment to swing the rook across, and he thought that a sensible move like bishop e2 would be more sensible. Get a piece off the back rank. He can always do it this way instead if he decides to do it at all, and also block a potential check if that's the case. The prophylactic move really with rook d2. Prophylactic, by the way, being in this case that like a preventative move, stopping something before it's happened. Okay, so knight c5 happened. Computer didn't like it. Sorry. Computer didn't like it. I didn't like it. I don't think anyone liked it. I think there's definitely a mistake giving up the e-pawn. Again, a little bit giving up the tension. I really don't understand why he didn't play something like h8. I don't understand personally. I have no reason for you, I'm afraid, guys. Maybe it's beyond me, but I really don't know. Yeah, anyway, he played knight c5. Maybe he thought that he could get something better and he didn't really care about the e-pawn. But ultimately, I think it was the pawns, losing the pawns on the king side that led to his demise in this game. So maybe in hindsight, that was better to not give up this e5 pawn and let the rest crumble, as it were. So queen takes, f6, queen f4, simple stuff. Knight b1. We evaluated the possibility of like taking there and going knight d1. But even if you forget the calculations, I think it just doesn't make sense to not have a contender on the d file, because then you're just giving black the d file. So I think this made a lot of sense. Now bishop takes a2. Brave move, especially after b3. King b7, a move that I predicted a few moves beforehand. Actually, because the reason that I gave, I said at some point I feel like it makes sense to play king b7, because in a lot of the calculations that we were seeing, there was some really cool calculations, if I should go back, where, for example, if he played, was it here? No, it wasn't here, was it? Where was the bishop takes a6 line? It's earlier. No. If anyone remembers where the bishop takes a6 line was. Found something. Okay. So where we've got sort of knight b1, b3, for example, knight takes b3, pawn takes, here, rook takes, king b2, bishop e6, e5. The queen can't, well, here, the queen can't move, for example, to here or whatever, because bishop takes a6 is checkmate. But also, if we go back, for example, queen c5 check, king b2, black is completely losing because we're threatening bishop takes a6 checkmate again, and the bishop, which we'd probably prelude with a rook attacking the queen first to stop it coming into c2. But Yes, and b4 without f6. Thank you. You're right. So would that have been? Where would that have been? Was after bishop e2? Yeah, I can't find it. Yeah, but as in, I don't know why it's not on the, because we definitely analyzed it. Queen takes e5, knight b1, queen a5. Ah, yes, thank you, queen a5. Yeah, it was basically that. Yeah, thank you very much, FK Gan. Absolutely, it was these queen a5 lines that basically this was a problem that you could play. Bishop takes a6, check. Can't play knight takes, got to play queen takes, and then this is much more comfortable for white. Then you're just going to be a pawn up after this one goes. You've got a lot of security. It's not even easy for black to take this pawn. A lot of weaknesses to attack. This is just very comfortable for white. Thank you very much for that, FK again. Okay, so back to the game. f6, queen f4. So this is why in this position, black opts for king b7 to just get out the way. e5, the computer really doesn't like, and it's because black has this spectacular move, which is knight takes b3. So if he plays, well, in fact, I think it was, the name was beginning with an M. I can't remember the name, sorry. Is it Mans? Something like that. One of our viewers, thank you very much for that, came up with the excellent move bishop c4, which turns out, in my opinion, to be the best move in this position, because it just solidifies everything. And it's not necessarily to bring this around to here, but just to stop any sacrifices here, potentially play e5 next, and it just really keeps everything nice, tight, and compact. But Hans played e5, presumably assuming that knight takes b3 was not a threat, because bishop takes b3 isn't. Maybe he did some calculations and he missed something somewhere. I don't know. I think this is really the only proper mistake from Hans in the entire game. But I think I would go as far to say that this is an inaccuracy. The game is not over, but it is a significant inaccuracy. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Well, just to briefly sort of go through what that might look like if knight takes b3, c takes b3, bishop takes b3. You can play king d2, but at the end of the day, the positional stuff, it gets really difficult. So we'll have a look at that in a second. But king b2, bishop takes d1, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop takes d1, and f takes, queen takes. And this ending, it feels like black isn't going to lose, at least, right? And black lost in the end, so it's got to be better, I assume. This feels like it may not win, but I like black's chances more than I like white's. And that was better than anything that happened in the game. So I definitely think that was a majorly missed opportunity from Étienne. But a big plus from Hans's point of view. And so I was just reading that. Yeah, Stockfish gives knight b3 as just an incredibly good move in this position. Absolutely. But unfortunately for Étienne, not unfortunately for Hans, unfortunately for black here, goes with knight e6. And as soon as he gives away that pressure, as soon as he gives away that momentum, as soon as he doesn't take that chance, that really important chance, that's it, really. White can just steamroll. And that's what to his great credit, that's exactly what Hans did. So queen c4. This is again an option to take on a6. Okay, because if king takes, then queen takes c4, and then you take the knight. If queen takes, then you can play queen takes here, king c8 takes here and be very comfortable, or in fact go sort of the other way and go like knight c3 and just make sure that you win the piece. Ultimately both very good options. And the computer says level, but I definitely think there's still a game to be had. And I would take white because I like all of these holes that sort of black has in the position from white's perspective. And as long as he can stay away from perpetual checks and the queen getting in at some point, as long as he can protect against that before it happens, a sort of prophylactic type thing again, then I think white should be fine. But white is fine, but he's not necessarily winning the way he was in the game. And this is exactly what I mentioned earlier, that this is the difference between, well, really us and them, I guess. One of the differences is that they'll keep going, keep that pressure up. And I think that was the difference in this game, is that Hans kept the pressure up when he needed to. So he could have simplified into some easier ending where he has some slight edge, arguably. But no, he kept everything on the board for as long as he could, and just pressed. And pressed and solidified when he could. Once he gets this bishop c4 in, I think once he got the bishop c4 in, he's just very comfortable. It's very solid. He stopped the b3 tactics, the b3 stuff. There's no sort of funny checks with the knight here. The king's fairly safe over here once the bishop goes. If the queen comes this way, not there. The queen comes this way, for example. He's just very solid again, and the queen's still running rampant with black not having many options. So I like white's position here. Computer says it's plus 0.5, but I think this is the real turning point, because with just 13 minutes left to go, black had no idea what to do, because he has no tangible sort of next plan, next idea, next sort of target, a next goal for him to hit. That's really difficult to find in this position. So I think the computer wants us to play queen c5, which again keeps up the pressure, and I quite like that move, because at least you are putting the queen on the same file as the king, and giving some aggression towards b3, giving those possibilities, making sure they're still there. But instead, this is probably the pivotal move that really changes the evaluation of the position, which is rook h f8. I think all it was, because obviously he didn't miss that Hans could take this h pawn, but I think he probably under-evaluated the significance of this like sort of push of the h pawn when it came to it. When it comes to the ending, when things are simplified down, and I think probably underestimated how quickly things would simplify down as soon as this happened. But again, bishop takes b1, I think is equally in combination with the rook hf8. If he doesn't want this to become a problem, he needs to keep the tension. But instead, he swaps off too quickly, releasing the tension on this queen side, where the king is for white. And now black, again, like even more so than before, has nothing to target, nothing to go for, right? So knight takes f3, queen comes back to defend, to gain control of the center, attack the knight, and make way for this pawn up here to just wander upwards. Knight comes back, g5, destabilizing this pawn that protects the knight, and again making a break for it, as it were, with these pawns. Suddenly this rook that I said earlier it's not doing anything. Suddenly it becomes one of the most important pieces, possibly the most important piece alongside the queen on the board. Knight takes, queen takes, rook takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. Etienne just goes, okay, everything is coming off. From here, he just goes, yeah, bam, everything's coming off. Offers to swap queens, and now if black takes, if white takes, that is an option. But if white takes, it's going to be much more difficult to try and win this ending. Much more difficult. And obviously Etienne was doing a double attack, as it were, threatening to swap off. Sorry, I don't know where you mean. I've got a comment: knight d2, rook takes d2, rook takes d2, queen f4. I'm not entirely sure where you mean. Oh, I see. Oh, someone was asking probably about. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, in this position, if knight d2 check, then you have this nice little tactic that stops that in its tracks. And white's just a piece up there, so white's completely winning. So yeah, absolutely, well pointed out. Thank you, Gukeli. Yeah. So, and I think this is really classy from HANS. He could simplify. He could just. I think a lot of players will naturally just try and defend the pawn and then try and push it. But he uses a lot of open space play, a lot of tactical ideas to just keep the pawn like impossible from taking. Not because it was defended, but because if he dared take his rook or his queen out of the game to take it, then he'd destroy him on the other side of the board. So very clever play here. So queen d4, threatening queen d6 and stopping queen takes g5. Rook, again, you think, okay, well, now there's two on it. I can't defend that. Comes up with another clever idea of g6, because now if queen takes, maybe, but if rook takes this, then you've got where before queen takes could have taken, or rook takes, and then it's defended by the other major piece. Now if he plays rook takes g6, you've got moves like queen h8, king c7, queen h7, and then you're winning the rook. Yeah, so that's just completely winning as well. So he can't take that. Queen b7 to try and sort of cover the all-important second rank, or seventh rank in this case. And then the final move that causes the resignation, just rook f1, really clinical stuff. He still can't take here, because now you play rook f8 and the king can't go this way, so it's got to come this way, and then you would checkmate there. So just to go over that briefly, you would get, this is checkmate, and so you'd probably have to do this, which is also going to be checkmate. So that's completely winning. Can't take it. If you can't take it, he doesn't really have anything else to do, and then he's probably going to play something like rook f7 next, taking that second rank, and well, that's just resignable, easily resignable. I mean, there's so many mates coming in here. Even just if all he could do was push the pawn, play rook f7, push the pawn, and rook f8 and queen. That's that really. So very impressive finishing from HANS. Solid throughout. Only really one sort of error in judgment, which was allowing the knight takes b3, which thankfully for HANS, Etienne did not see. So I think, guys, that's a wrap from me. I've commentated the game and gone through it again. I hope for those of you who stuck around for the review, thank you for those who commented and let me know. Please pop me a message or whatever on my socials, Stephen AJ Watley. Comment through here whenever you like, of course. Thank you very much, everyone, for the very kind comments. I have been Candidate Master Stephen Watley, commentating on Hans Niemann's Taking on the World event, and a spectacular start from him. Absolutely brilliant results, beating Anish Giri, Nikita Vitukov, and Étienne Bacrot. Very impressive stuff, very impressive play, and very solid play in this game. yeah, just what more can I say but impressive. Thank you very much for your kind comments, and that is me done for the day. We'll see you back tomorrow. Might not be me, might be, who knows, but we'll see you back tomorrow for more of this incredible tournament with some live coverage and live commentary. Thank you very much, guys. Have a wonderful evening.